Shabbat and where? Then they're coming here? Maybe 6? Right now, Vice News. I'm freelance, but no, I'm based here. I'm freelance, so I work with New York Times, BBC, and today it's Vice. So it's non-stop. What about you? AP. Nice to meet you. Actually, do you remember? Do you know Sarah Lee, right? Yeah, good friend of mine. Yeah. Is she back in town now? Yeah. Man, it's been. I've just lost all track of time. All right, take care, all right?
and revitalised Parliament with a new mandate to deliver on the will of the people and get Brexit done. Because that new Parliament, in just a few weeks' time, will have before it a great new deal with the EU, a great new deal. That brings together members across the House, as the Honourable Lady mentioned earlier on. And it will be the job of that new Parliament, in just a few weeks' time, to ratify that deal, that withdrawal deal, and put an end to this long period of parliamentary dither and delay. And I'm glad to say, Mr. Speaker, that since I first put forward the idea of a general election as a way out of this impasse, the ice floes have begun to crack, and the Lib Dems are now in favour of it, and the Scots Nats, the Scottish Nationalist Party, is now in favour of it. There is only one blockage still standing in the way of democracy. There's only one party that refuses to trust the judgment of the people. There's only one party that's still running scared of an election, and that is the main party of opposition, who are failing in their defining function. Dogs bark. Well, we haven't heard anything to the contrary. Dogs bark, cows moo. Oppositions are meant to campaign for elections, except for this one. And I have no way of knowing. I have no way of knowing what the honourable gentleman is going to say. He's called 35 times for elections since in the last year alone. I have no idea why he's been so opposed to an election. Maybe it's because he's been following the precepts of his intellectual mentor, Fidel Castro, whose adoring crowds used to serenade him, Mr. Speaker, with the cry of revoluciones sí, elecciones no. Maybe congenitally opposed. Maybe he's been listening to his honourable friends, the Shadow Chancellor or the member for Holborn and St Pancras, who've been arguing, I gather, against an election. I just want to say to the right honourable gentleman, you should beware of their motives in cancelling him against a general election, because it's not so much that they fear a general election, though probably they do. It's just that they don't want a general election with him as their leader. But whatever, I don't know what's been holding him back from this obvious democratic exercise. But whatever it is, I hope that he will now, and I've listened to, I hope that he will now stand up and say that he has mastered his doubts, and that he is finally willing to submit to the electorate. And he's mentioned that he's a great eater of porridge, Mr. Speaker. All I can say is that when it comes to elections, in his fastidiousness, when it comes to the offer of elections, he reminds me of Goldilocks, Mr. Speaker. One offer is too hot, one's too cold. I hope he'll be able to stand up this afternoon and say, this time, this offer of an election is just right. Because it is, Mr. Speaker. And if he does, and I hope he does, then we will be able to put that choice to the people of this country. And we can go his way, which is for an economic recipe that would mean the destruction of the UK wealth-creating system, over taxation of the kind that's derived from revolutionary Venezuela, combined with the political nightmare, a nightmare agenda of not one but two referendums, one on the EU, that's his policy as far as I understand it, one in Scotland, with all their potential for further rancour and recrimination, Mr. Speaker, or else we can go forward with this government, a government that has secured a great deal that allows us now to leave the EU as one whole United Kingdom. One whole United Kingdom. England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. One whole United Kingdom. Able together to do free trade deals around the world. Able to set our own path, to make our own laws, to take back control of our borders, our money and our regulations. Able to deliver all the benefits and all the freedoms, Mr. Speaker, of Brexit, from new free ports to more humane treatment of animals, which he would block, from tax breaks for new technology to cutting VAT on sanitary products. It's a deal, Mr. Speaker, that they said was impossible 3 months ago. They said we couldn't change the withdrawal agreement. They said that we'd never get rid of the backstop, and we did. And the deal is that. The deal is that. And it is ready to be approved by a new Parliament. And it will have a government that is yearning with every fibre of its being to be able to get on and deliver our one-nation conservative agenda. A vision for uniting this country and levelling up with record investments in health, like nothing else. 20,000 more police officers, more funding for every primary, every secondary school in the country, levelling up across this whole a government able to commit to fantastic public services and infrastructure precisely because we believe in free markets and enterprise. We believe in them. And we believe in free markets and enterprise and in the wealth-creating sector of this economy in a way that causes a shadow of Transylvanian horror to pass over the semi-communist faces of the front bench opposite. And that is the argument. That is the argument that I want to have with the right honourable gentleman, because that, frankly, Mr. Speaker, is the biggest and most important difference between us one nation Conservatives and the Socialist opposite. And there is only one way now. There is only one way now to move this country forward and to have that, and that is to get Brexit done. And there is only one way to get Brexit done in the face of this unrelenting parliamentary obstructionism, this endless, willful, fingers crossed, not me, gov refusal to deliver on the mandate of the people, and that is, Mr. Speaker, to refresh this Parliament and give the people a choice. And I say to the whole House, and to all those who may still be hesitating about whether to vote for this bill, there is only one way to restore the esteem in which our democracy is held, and to recover the respect in which Parliament should be held by the people of this country, and that is finally to offer up to the judgment of the people of this country, and I commend this bill.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Labour backs a general election because we want this country to be rid of this reckless and destructive Conservative government. A government that has caused more of our children to be living in poverty, more pensioners to be in poverty, and more people to be in work poverty. More families without a home to call their own, and more people sleeping rough on our streets. A government that has cut and sold off so much of our important public services. No, I won't give way. That government which created the vicious, hostile environment which saw our own citizens deported from this country. It is time for real change. And I've said consistently, when no deal is off the table, we will back an election. Today, after much denial and much bluster by the Prime Minister, that deal is officially off the table. So this country can vote for the government that it deserves. One... Yes.
I thank my right honourable friend, and I shall be voting against an early election today, and encourage as many of my colleagues as possible to defy the threats and blandishments to do so. Because the reality is that the uncertainty of an outcome of a general election most certainly does not take no deal off the table.
I hope my friend will join in this campaign to defeat this government, to bring in a government that will end injustice, poverty and inequality in this country. That is what I joined the Labour Party for all those years ago, and that I'll be very proud to take as our message to the people of this country. And to give our public services the funding they need and end the threat of privatisation that hangs over so many public service workers, and stop the grotesque poverty and inequality in our country. Rebuilding an economy in every region and every nation of this country. Tackle the climate emergency with a Green New Deal, a green industrial revolution that will bring good quality jobs to many areas of the country that have been denied them by this government and their Liberal Democrat accomplices during the coalition years. And after 3 years of Conservative failure, get Brexit sorted by, and we're the only party doing it, say give the people a final say on what happens over Brexit. We will now launch the most ambitious radical campaign for real change in this country. And I look forward to campaigning in a general election all over the country, including in Uxbridge, if the Prime Minister is still the Conservative candidate there at that time. Mr. Speaker,
I'm extremely grateful. I'm extremely grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for giving way. Can I ask him that in the upcoming election we are about to have, front and centre will be the right of the Scottish people to choose their own future. If the Scottish National Party win a majority of seats in Scotland, would he respect that result?
I'm looking forward to campaigning all over Scotland to support Labour candidates to be elected in Scotland. Indeed, I was there last weekend, and the enthusiasm of Scottish Labour to get out there and campaign is palpable all over. And I'm delighted to support Scottish Labour in their campaign to bring £70 billion of public investment into Scotland under a Labour government, something the SNP can offer.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and I look forward to campaigning with him in Scotland in the upcoming election. But as he will know, one of the crucial things in this election is going to be turnout and ensuring we can get as many people out and using their votes as possible. In Scotland especially, it's very dark, it's very cold. Would he support the idea to have a polling day as a public holiday to ensure maximum turnout?
I thank for that intervention and compliment her on her work. And I agree with her that a public holiday on election day would actually be a very good idea, because it does mean that everyone could then get along to vote without the problems of being at work at that time. It's something that has been discussed before, and I don't know all the amendments that are coming up later on this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, but if that one is included, that would be very welcome indeed. Yes.
thank my right honourable friend for giving way. And he will know, and I raised this yesterday, I've tabled a cross-party amendment supported by many Labour colleagues for votes at 16 at the table. And would he agree with me? The Prime Minister talks a lot about the United Kingdom. In Wales and in Scotland, 16-year-olds now have the right to vote in elections and in referenda, and that should be afforded to all the United Kingdom 16-year-olds.
I thank my friend for that intervention. I'm coming on to that in a moment, but I absolutely do agree with him that all 16-year-olds should have the right to vote, because it seems to me fundamental to our democracy. It's young people's future, after all, that we'll be debating in this election. I thank him for his intervention and the work he's done on bringing about parliamentary scrutiny to this whole process. Mr. Speaker, the House has amended the programme motion. And it amended the programme motion, I think, in a very helpful way, which empowers this chamber, the House of Commons, to amend this legislation. But I think we should just reflect for a moment. The Prime Minister was actually trying to stifle parliamentary democracy. An unprecedented, an almost unprecedented edict that only the government could amend its own legislation, which presumably they wrote last night. So the idea of amending today what they wrote last night suggests they have a problem over memory loss, perhaps over an item or something. I don't know what it is. And so I am pleased that those amendments are going to be debated today. No, I won't give way. And what it does, Mr. Speaker, is sums up in a couple of words the undemocratic and authoritarian instincts of this government and this Prime Minister in their relation to Parliament. So I want to put on record my thanks to my friend, the member for Walthamstow, for her persistence in tabling that amendment last night, which means that the House will have an opportunity to debate a number of very serious amendments today. And we will be seeking to expand the franchise in the December election. That means supporting votes at 16, as is the case now for Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly elections. And I think it also means that we support the rights of EU citizens with settled status to vote in elections in this country. After all, we do recognise their contribution to our society. We do give them votes in local elections. It seems to me only logical. Since they've made their future in this country, in our society, they should have a right to vote on their future as well. And I look forward to supporting those amendments later on today.
Thank the honourable gentleman, and I look forward to getting out on the campaign trail and smashing the Conservatives at the ballot box and returning more Labour colleagues here. I'm particularly pleased about what he's just said around EU settled status here. We already allow Commonwealth citizens to vote in our elections, and I want to ask him if he will make sure that we try and ensure all EU citizens who are settled here get to vote as well.
Yes, my friend is right that for permanently, Commonwealth citizens have had the right to vote in British elections, and that's absolutely right. And most Commonwealth countries, so far as I know, reciprocate on that. And the relationship with Ireland means that all Irish nationals have an automatic right to vote in UK elections, and vice versa. No, I won't give way. And it seems to me, no, I won't. It seems to me, I'd already reminded you that I wasn't going to give way, so I say it again, no.
Order. The right honourable gentleman should resume his seat. He's been in the House since 2001, so he's familiar with the parliamentary etiquette, which stipulates quite clearly that when somebody who has the floor is not giving way, the right honourable gentleman accepts the verdict. He doesn't have a right to intervene, and he ought to have learned that by now. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so we just make that point that we want any election to involve as many people as possible. It is meant to be a big exercise in democracy, and I hope the amendments... I've already reminded you I wasn't going to give way, so I say for the fourth time, no. That in that election, everyone should have the right to participate in it. It's their future and this country's future that is at stake. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has failed in his promise to be out of the European Union, do or die, on the 31st of October. But it may be that date Parliament dissolves and therefore will mark the end of his tenure in office. So, Mr. Speaker, whatever date the House decides the election will be, I'm ready for it, we're ready for it, because we want to be able to say to the people of this country, there is an alternative to austerity, there is an alternative to inequality, there is an alternative to sweetheart trade deals with Donald Trump, there is an alternative of a government that invests in all parts of the country, and a government that's determined to end injustice in our society, and a government that's determined to give our young people a sense of hope in their society rather than the prospects of indebtedness and insecure employment in the future, which is sadly all the Conservative government and their coalition with the Lib Dems ever brought them. I'm very ready to go out there and give that message in any election whenever it comes.
Sir William Cash. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I very much applaud the Prime Minister for the stand that he has taken continuously over the past month. He is doing the right thing for the right reason. Furthermore, I've listened to the Leader of the Opposition talking about autocratic, undemocratic decision-making. We have witnessed time and time and time again undemocratic decisions taken on the Benn Act, on series of other enactments, on motions, continuously over the same period of months. The opposition are a disgrace. They have completely undermined the democracy in this House. They have undermined the referendum, or are trying to do so. And at last they've been dragged kicking and screaming to the dispatch box, and it sounds as if today they are effectively going to agree that we do have a general election in December. So I have absolutely no compunction whatsoever in condemning the opposition for their shameless behaviour, and also for voting against earlier motions over the last few months to have an early general election. I just want to add one other thing, Mr. Speaker, and it is this. During the passage of the Fixed-Term Parliaments Act back in 2010-2011, I'm glad to be able to say I voted against the second reading of that bill for precisely the reasons that we are now having to overcome. I said at the time, in the second reading and again on various amendments, that the provisions of that bill, which this bill is at last putting straight, that the provisions of that bill are in defiance of the democratic mandate. It is about whips and patronage. It has nothing to do with the people outside. There is damage being done to the people of this country. I went on to say that there is no mandate of any kind for any party or in any manifesto or in any part of the political system. And I also said, with regard to the simple majority of one, that this has been the case from time to time immemorial, from the very inception of our parliamentary process, in what is sometimes described as the mother of parliaments. That is now being changed in a manner which will seriously alter the method whereby a government may fall. What matters, I said, is the constitutional principle which underpins the basis of having a simple majority in this House. This two-thirds majority has always been wrong. I will not give way to either of the gentlemen from the other side of the House for a very simple reason. They have consistently tried to obstruct Brexit on the most specious and completely unacceptable reasons.
Has the honourable gentleman completed his oration? He has. Yeah. There's a rather unseemly atmosphere. Mr. Linden, you're a very overexcitable fellow today. Calm yourself. Mr. Newlands next to you is clearly moderately embarrassed. He's going to try to encourage you to tread a path of virtue, and we should say 3 cheers to that. But meanwhile, you can smile because I'm about to call your leader, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Stone. And I have to say, I think he's just written the SNP leaflets in the election campaign for us. You know, the honourable member says that the SNP has tried to obstruct Brexit. Well, Mr. Speaker, guilty as charged. Because, let me explain to the House exactly why. We're used to referendums in Scotland. We've had two, one in 2014 and one in 2016. But crucially, Mr. Speaker, we were told in 2014 that Scotland stayed in the United Kingdom, that would be staying in Europe. But more than that, we were told that this was going to be a union of equals, that Scotland was going to be respected. And, Mr. Speaker, what has happened? Scotland in the European referendum voted by 62% to remain in Europe. Our Parliament, our government, has sought to give voice to that. We've published document after document, Scotland's place in Europe, where we've sought to compromise with the United Kingdom government. And in every step of the way, whether it was the previous Prime Minister or this one, we've been ignored. And I've repeatedly made the point, and I make no apology for making it here again today. We on these benches are simply not prepared to sit back and allow Scotland to be taken out of the European Union against its will. So on that basis, Mr. Speaker, I welcome the opportunity of an election. Because make no mistake, the election that's coming is going to be the right of Scotland to determine its own future. And we will reflect on everything which has happened since 2017, when 13 Scottish Conservatives were temporarily elected to this House. Because every step of the way, they've voted against Scotland's interests. They have given no consideration to the fact that every single local authority area in Scotland voted to remain. And, Mr. Speaker, just think about what Brexit would do to us. Just think about the challenge that we face of growing our population, a challenge that we have had for decades. But on the basis of free movement of people, one that we've risen to over the last few decades, our economy is growing. European citizens have made a contribution to our economy. We have collectively benefited from the right to live, work and travel in 28 EU member states. We voted to retain those rights, and yet the Conservatives want to take us out. So, Mr. Speaker, I really look forward to that election, and we can reinforce the mandate that we already have from the election in Scotland in 2016, when yet again the people in Scotland voted the SNP into. We have a mandate for an independence referendum, and it ill behoves this House to frustrate the legitimate demands of our Parliament, of our government. And when we get back, it has to be the case that if the people in Scotland back the SNP again, that we have the right term in our future. I'm grateful that the European Union have granted us an extension till the end of January, and we must use that time wisely. But I say to our friends in Europe, please remember to stand by Scotland in our hour of need. And as our dear friend in the European Parliament, Alan Smith, said, keep a light on for Scotland, because we're coming. And, Mr. Speaker, that is because we are ambitious for our country. We want to grow our economy. We want to continue to benefit from the single market and the customs union, to make Scotland a destination in Europe. And indeed, Mr. Speaker, to complete that journey that Scotland embarked on with devolution 20 years ago, a Parliament that has delivered for the people of Scotland, a Parliament that is pushing on with addressing the climate change challenge that we face, a Parliament that is doing its job, that has delivered education free at the point of need, not delivering education based on our ability to pay. I could go on about the differences in the way that our government has delivered for our people and the growing self-confidence that we see in that country. Mr. Speaker,
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. As he spells out, it's going to be quite straightforward for the SNP to be able to write its manifesto for the election upcoming. But the Prime Minister has failed in his promise of do or die, and the Scottish Conservatives have been acting against the interests of the people of Scotland and against the wishes in their referendum in 2016. So I wonder how easy it will be for them to be trusted in this election. Isn't it true, my right honourable friend, that in this election we cannot give the Scottish Conservatives or this Prime Minister any chance at all?
Absolutely, and that allows me to ask the question, where is the Prime Minister? Because he seems to have beetled and scuttled out of the chamber. One wonders if he's away to dig a ditch. You know, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that I can be proud of, that in our referendum in Scotland in 2014, that we gave the right to 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in that referendum. Why? Because it was about their future. It was a principled decision that those that are following us, that are going to be living and working in our country, have a right to have a say in its future. And, Mr. Speaker, the SNP call on members to reduce the voting age for all elections to 16 and to also extend the franchise to citizens of the European Union. You know, we've heard in the debate today about the fact that citizens from the Commonwealth are given the right to vote in our election. Why? Why, Mr. Speaker? Is it the case that European nationals, that are our friends, that work with us, that are part of our community, whose rights are affected by what the Conservatives want to do not have that right to vote in our elections? That is an absolute disgrace. Those that pay taxes in our country should have rights of representation. I will give way one time.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. Can the right honourable gentleman tell me, are there any other European countries which offer the right for European citizens not from their country to vote in their national elections?
Scotland.
Well, if the honourable lady was listening, I just explained it's something we do in Scotland. But you know, the problem, Mr. Speaker, for the Tories